Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to this very, very, very special episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today, not just a best guest, but a very close friend and a person I look up to now, having lost my own father a little over a year ago as a father figure myself. So very excited to welcome Phil Markel, the father of murder victim Dan Markel, to the show, along with my beautiful mother, Carmela Waldman. Sound the Karm alarm. And people are just filing in on this early Sunday morning. So I just want to say a quick thing, and then we'll just get into a conversation here. Today's show is all about Dan. This coming week is 10 years since he was murdered, of course, in that Tallahassee driveway by a bunch of thugs. And then we come to find out over the years that it was a murder for hire plot. And that person, for now, one is in prison, and another, it appears, is about to head that way. But the show is not about them. The show today is all about the Markel family, all about Dan Markel, who he was raised by, and the type of person we want to remember him as. So without further ado, Phil Markel, welcome to the show. Appreciate you doing this. I know this firsthand. You're a man of few words. We met at that person's trial, and you were kind of very soft-spoken at first, but by the second or third night, you and I were hanging out. We were hanging out for hours. Why have you not really said much about this, except for a soundbite or two here or there, Phil?
I'm a person of few words. I learned a long time ago that you learn more by listening than by speaking. And I like to listen. I'm not a person that seeks publicity. I just am who I am.
As I said off the top, this year, of course, this week, I should say, marks 10 years that you've been dealing with this aspect of Dan's life and legacy, cut way too short. At this 10-year mark, what's going through your mind as we enter this week now?
Well, there's virtually isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of him. I can't say that this is special or different. He was in my life for the years that he was, and he still is in a different way. So I think of him virtually every day in one way or another. And, 10 years is a long time. Of course, I lost a son and I've lost 2 grandchildren, but, that's part of life, I guess. It's not the order that it should be, but so we have to learn to deal with what we get.
Now, Karm, you lost a child, but in a much different way, at a much, much younger age, obviously. Dan was in his 40s when Phil lost him.
You absolutely cannot compare the two. Don't even try.
So hop in, tell me, how are you feeling for the Markels ahead of this ignominious week?
Well, the only thing maybe that could be compared, that the pain is always there. It's like you are never 100%. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think time heals. I think the pain and that very painful feeling underlies like an underlying pain is always there, and it can be 1 year. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to feel. Tell me if you feel that way, because I feel the loss of my father, who I lost 80 years ago. And I don't think you quote recover.
Phil, how do you feel? I mean, is that true?
Well,
Is that a true statement? You always hear there's no such thing as closure, which I think I agree with, but do you ever recover, Phil?
I recover in a sense that the last number of years I've been able to push it a little further back in my mind, rather than it being right smack in front of my nose. You know, I play a lot of golf. You play with people that you don't always know, and people have a question. You know, you have family, you have kids, you have grandchildren, and so it's virtually every day, one way or another, it comes into my mind. You know, one of the things that I do, it's not I'm really not very religious, but you know, every time there is a yortzeit or I go to the synagogue, which is far and few between times, but whenever the prayer of Kaddish is said, I still get up and say it out of respect to my son. I don't think about my parents anymore because it's really like 20, 30 years ago. But I still do it for Danny and I guess for myself in a different way. So, you know, he's in my mind all the time. I think of him sometimes for a minute, sometimes a little longer, sometimes, you know, silently I'll talk to him or say something to him. I don't feel the necessity to actually visit his gravesite and stand in front of a tombstone and talk to him. I do it every minute, right now as I'm talking to you, he's in my mind. So you know, it's everybody has their own ways of dealing with these situations, and this is how I do it.
And that's interesting because I'll be honest, till my father's own funeral last March, I never saw my brother's cemetery plot, which is right next to my dad, although they had to move him. But it's interesting because my mom never went to the cemetery, and it's true. I think everyone, Karm, what about that? I mean, everyone needs to mourn in their own way. Even
I was a little bit feeling like a similar soul to Phil's, because Phil also doesn't need that stone to remember his son, and I don't need the stone either. And I was, unfortunately, sadly, there was no stone for the people when I was young. But this is not about me. I have a question for Phil.
please
Yes.
ask.
What makes you feel like even a hair better, or just a little better? What does it talking about it? You know, psychologists say, oh, you have to talk about it. You have to talk about it, express your emotions. And I don't think it's universally you have to do that to feel better. There are people who need to talk about it, and there are people who need not to talk about it. And it's okay either way. And so I remember, by the way, parenthesis, when I first met my husband, I was just I was 21. And one of the first arguments we had, he was going to study psychiatry, he didn't start yet. And we were arguing, if when something is painful to you, what is better, to distract the person and make them think of something else, or dig into the wound and kind of like an actual wound, clean out the wound rather than just cover it up. And I felt sometimes it's totally against the party line, but I felt it's sometimes better to cover it up.
I I don't feel I have to cover up. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I'm very comfortable with who I am and what I've done in life and where I am at this moment. I was very, very fortunate to have two wonderful, wonderful children. I I did my best to provide them with a foundation in life, and that's an education, whether it's school, whether it's travel, etc. I was fortunate that they were able to absorb and do well in all that. So I don't feel that I have to talk about it a lot or compete with others, that my son was better than their son or whatever, anything like that. I'm, I'll give you an example. When I play golf, if I'm playing with somebody new and this topic comes up, if I talk about it, it distracts me from my game, and I have to try and block it out so that I don't score badly on the next couple of holes. But basically, I worked. It wasn't like this at the beginning, of course, but as time moved on, I worked very hard at this, and I just try to live every day that I have, and I remember the good things. It's an amazing, I don't know, the mind or is an amazing thing that when I think about him, I only remember the good parts. I can't remember being angry with him. I can't remember why I would be angry with him. And obviously he was a bit of a Dennis the Menace. When he was young, he was hard to control for a while. But I only think about all the good stuff, all the pleasures that I had with him. We as a family, with my daughter and him, we were 4 people. We had a lot of tremendous good times. We traveled very extensively. I was in a business where I had to travel, so I was fortunate that I was able to take them with us on many trips. And that's the way I look at it.
Phil, we've got a comment here from Wesley John Holmes, who happens to be an Australian, now living in Tokyo, says parents should never have to outlive their children. Such an unbearable thought. And then you've got Mish Cavernos, who's also in the chat, and she's from Cape Town, South Africa. She lost her mother. My question to you is, we have people from Asia, from Cape Town, South Africa, big contingency in Canada, the UK. We even have someone who watches in Tasmania, Nigeria. Why do you think there's been this global attention towards Dan's case?
I don't know. It's an unusual situation, and I'm not sure I really want to go into all that at this moment. It's a parent should never have to lose a child. It's just the wrong way of nature. It's not the way it's meant to be. Grandparents are supposed to die before children. Parents are supposed to die before children. And when it's reversed, it's very painful. It's, there's so much in life that children provide to the parents and grandparents that, they shouldn't be the ones to die first. It's just against all of Mother Nature. And, if somebody is sick, you understand that. If somebody gets hit by a truck crossing the street, it's an accident. This wasn't one of those cases.
And Henchie Held comes to us from Jerusalem. They're sending their regards. Rosemary Romero has a question, Phil. And in a minute, I want to get into you a little bit. Most people don't know anything about you. So I want to get back to what you did, where you grew up, and then we'll get into Dan's life a little bit as well, of course. But Rosemary Romero, what is something about Dan that nobody would know about him? You just said he was a little bit of a Dennis the Menace. You don't really usually put those two and two together with Harvard Law and Dennis the Menace. But what is something that nobody would know about Dan?
Oh, I have so many stories. I have so many thoughts when I think about this. I remember when he was born, I think I mentioned some of this or part of this story in my remarks at one of the trials. You know, Dan was born, he was almost 10 pounds. And in those days in Montreal, we were living in Montreal. I was born in Montreal. Parents, I mean, you weren't allowed in the delivery room. You could stay with your wife up until the moment she gives birth, but then you had to step out of the delivery room. When Dan was born, these rules changed, and we were very good friends with the obstetrician that delivered Danny, and he allowed me to watch this unbelievable, very memorable time of my life. And I actually saw his head appear and his shoulders. I mean, when I saw his shoulders, he was 10 pounds. I thought of him as being a fullback playing football or something one day. You know, he slimmed down a lot after that. When he was very young, he was very, very active. He was that's Shelly and Danny. He was
Phil. That has to be what, 1970? I mean, right when he was born, 71. Is that when the year he was born?
72, I would think, somewhere around then. Yeah. He was.
By the way, I'm sorry, Phil. These are photos that Phil has shared with us that no one has ever seen. We've got a lot of them. We're going to go through them, but this is a baby Dan Markel with his big sister Shelly. Go ahead, Phil.
Correct. Yeah. So, where was I?
Talking about how he was a little butterball, then he slimmed down.
So he was a very, very active child. He was always busy, and he always was doing things and running around. But he also had a side to him where he can spend. You know, we had a country cottage in the Laurentians, and I built this very large sandbox for the children, and he could spend hours in that sandbox playing, either with Shelly or some other friends, or even by himself. So he had moments where he can be very, very super active, and he had moments when he could play by himself as well. So he was a little unusual in that way, I think. But here you can see with the blonde hair, he was really a Dennis the Menace, and like a lot of kids that age, they love to play with pots and pans. Besides the fancy toys that you'd buy from all these toy stores.
Yeah, Phil, what's going on with that? I just bought my kid a Batmobile. It was like $29, and all he does is the same as your son, bangs on pots and does crazy things. So
or a broom, he'll like to sweep the floor, and that's what kids are all about.
Yeah. So Phil, you're Canadian, obviously, but you did not grow up in Toronto. Tell me what year did you come into the world, and what was it like growing up in Montreal?
Well, I was born in 1944, in Montreal. I have a sister who's 3.5 years younger than I am. Her name is Elaine. She's married to this wonderful, wonderful guy that he's not a brother-in-law. He's a brother. He's a terrific guy. She has 3 kids, and they have 3 children each. So I'm very, very close to that big side of the family. It's I went to school. I went to undergraduate school. I got a bachelor's degree in commerce. I went on and became a CA, or chartered accountant, or in the States it's called the CPA, and now it's called the CPA here as well. I had various careers. I practiced for a few years as a chartered accountant. I went in. I always dreamt about being in business for myself. Instead of counting somebody else's money, I wanted to count my own. So I was in the fashion business for about 20 years, and that's when I did a lot of traveling. And that's the opportunity that I gave my kids, that they were able to come with us and travel together, which is an education in itself that you don't get in school. And then I went into the warehousing and distribution business, and from there I retired. And I moved from Montreal to Toronto in 1977 when there was this major political upheaval in the province of Quebec. And I've lived in Toronto ever since, and I'm very happy here.
Phil, there's some. I want to get back to the fashion business. I'm curious about that. Annie K, Phil, are you comforted by the clear impact of Dan's legacy, both as a lawyer, professor, and as a great human being? I mean, do you take some comfort in that so many people have such respect for him, that they miss him so much, that they feel like they're part of their own family, that he's part of their own family?
Well, I told you that we were very fortunate to have two wonderful children, and both of them were very bright, very good in school, etc., etc. They were a little different. Shelly was more of a street smarts, social person, and Danny was more of a Danny. He didn't have a photographic memory, because people who have photographic memories can read a page and they remember what page it was and they can see the page. Danny had a tremendous ability to retain what he read. So and Danny was the type of kid that, this is very interesting. He had an open book. What I mean by an open book, whatever happened in the house, he would tell our friends. He didn't know how to keep a secret. And, I used to joke with our close friends that you probably know every penny I have in the bank because Danny would tell you, or something like that. It's, what can I say? It's, so I was lucky that we were lucky, Ruth and I, that we had two kids that were both capable, both made us very, very proud to this day. I'm very proud of Shelly and her kids. And of course, Danny, he became very successful. I remember very vividly, he was working in Washington, making a large amount of money, working for a very prestigious boutique law firm. And all of a sudden he decided to take his huge cut in salary and go and teach at FSU. And I said, Danny, and a lot of his friends that he respected that were successful basically said the same that I did. The first 10 years, you stay in the legal profession, you make your few bucks salted away in a bank account or invest it, and then you go teach. But that wasn't what he only wanted to teach. He loved to write, he loved to communicate, and he did what he wanted. And of course, we certainly couldn't stop him. We wouldn't want to stop him. We wanted him to enjoy life and do what he wanted to do. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. No, Phil, I mean, did you see signs of this desire to teach as a young child? Like, would he tell Shelly thing? There he is reading a book right there about baseball.
That's a funny story. That picture, if we did that today, they'd probably arrest us. Ruth and I, we take the kids, we go to New York, for example, when we were in the fashion business, and we'd shop the stores such as Macy's and Saks and what have you. And we take the kids. So during the day, we'd go into Saks Fifth Avenue, for example. We'd go to the shoe department where they always had comfortable chairs. We'd leave the two kids with their books, and they'd spend 3-4 hours while we ran around and shopped the stores. And we'd come back, and then we'd take them to a play, to a restaurant, and what have you. And that's an exact picture where you see the shoes in the background. They're in the shoe department. And if you do that today, of course, you'd probably get arrested.
Well, Phil, what did you do in the fashion business? And it seems like Dan didn't really have much of an interest in in designer clothing. He was more of an intellectual. He wasn't shallow like me.
Well, that's not really true. I have a very cute story to tell you. So we used to import a line of a collection of swimwear from Israel. It was not Gore-Tex, was another label that we were very successful with. And every July we'd go to Israel and we'd review the collection and decide what we wanted to bring into Canada. So we'd have a show with models, and they would come out and display all of the swimwear that we were looking at, the whole collection, and choose what we wanted to choose from. And the kids were young. Danny, I don't know, maybe he was, I don't remember, maybe 7, 8, in his early stages of life. And we'd give him a pencil and a paper, both kids, and we'd say, as the girls come out and model the bathing suits, write down which is your favorite, which swimsuit you like, this, which is this, what do you like better? And let's hear what you have to say. At the end of the show, we go over them, and Danny didn't write down anything. I said, what happened? He says, well, I liked them all. The models were beautiful. He didn't look at the swimwear. He was looking at the models.
How old was he at that? So how old was he?
He was very young. Maybe, I don't know, under 10 for sure.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, Dr. Ruth, may she rest in peace, passed away. And I learned a lot of what Dan was thinking about from her. And she was, by the way, a real hero. But Karm, I get nervous anytime you don't talk for very long. And
but I'm listening.
I know. But let me ask Karm, let me ask you a question, because you're a great read on people. And I don't say this about many people, but you and I have had the pleasure and the honor to get to know both Ruth and Phil. When we were in Toronto for the book signing, we went out to dinner with Phil. And I don't know. I have this very paternal feeling towards Phil. Like, he's such a salt of the earth guy. He reminds me of Dad, my own father, because my father was kind of soft spoken, a man of few words, just like you, Karm. And I was crying to you the other day that I was going through a rough patch, and I missed because you scream at me and Dad would comfort me. But the question here is,
I think that Phil is
my question is, are my instincts about Phil correct? He's a very salt of the earth guy. Why do you think that I am drawn to Phil?
That's exactly why. I mean, there are similarities there. He's also a very warm, loving, accepting father, non-critical, probably, like your father was. Your father was very, very warm and loving to you, and I think that's how Phil was with Dan.
And I find this really interesting because Phil, just the other day, by the way, Mish making fun, Joel crying, never. Dr. Ruth under the blankets here, yes, so I can lighten it up a tiny bit. But Phil, I yell at my mom because she's able to compartmentalize like a serial killer, I joke, and she doesn't openly mourn my father, but I know she's hurting. So I know. I mean, what do you want to say, Phil, to people? Because there's so many people in the chat when you came in who were talking about loved ones that they themselves have lost. What do you say to people who are maybe suffering silently from a loss of a loved one?
Well, I think you have to have a lot of memories. You have to think, you have a life to live. Sometimes, like, I'm a little older. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here. Or even if you're younger, I mean, sometimes you lose a spouse early in life or a child or whatever. Life has to go on, and you have to. Our time here, no matter what it is really relatively short. We're living longer these days than we used to, but as long as you're healthy and you're capable, you'll have to grab every free moment you can and enjoy life. That doesn't mean you shouldn't think about the lost ones. It doesn't mean that you forget about them. There's a time, there's a time and place for everything. I've always said, as an example to my children, my grandchildren, and a lot of other kids that I know graduating from high school, for example, going into university, I say, this is the best time of your life. You have no responsibilities other than work hard at whatever you're doing. And, there's a time for fun and there's a time for hard work, studying or whatever. And if you manage that time properly, you'll enjoy every minute you can, and that exists for you, for your life. And I say that to people who have lost spouses or kids or whatever. Don't forget the memory you have to have. Remember the good stuff, and but you have to move on. You have to enjoy every moment that you can, because you just don't know how long that's going to last for yourself.
Yeah, someone in the chat just said, you never know when your time's up. I mean, speaking of that, Phil, this is a dark question, but I'm just curious. Are you yourself afraid of dying? Is it something that you think about? I asked my mom this question, so I'm curious what your thoughts are.
No, I'm not. I'm very, very fortunate that I'm quite healthy. I'm physically capable of doing almost anything I want to do. I enjoy sports. I enjoy everything that I care to enjoy. And I look back on my career and I say, and on my life in general, and I say, maybe I could have done one or two things differently, but would it have been better? I don't know. So I'm lucky to have what I had, and I have no real regrets. And I look forward to whatever years I have left, and to enjoy as much as I can, and also keep the memories of my parents, my kids, my Danny, and etc. So that's where I am.
And Phil, you're seeing some photos here.
What?
Obviously, go ahead, Mom.
No, in the very beginning, I was listening very intently, and you said, I lost my son and my grandchildren. You mentioned that, you said it that way. And I wanted, my first reflex was to interrupt you, and I wanted to add the word temporarily you lost your grandchildren, but you have two wonderful grandchildren from Dan, which I think is a blessing. I mean, maybe I want to hear how you feel. I realize that you have had a very difficult, long, 10-year long alienation, not created by you, but nonetheless. But in the long run, I'm very positive. I want to hear how you feel.
And before we do that, we're looking at photos here of
that's why I mentioned it.
yeah,
now.
Dan is with his children there, Ben and Lincoln, and then this other photo you see Ruth and Phil with Ben and Lincoln, and then obviously Ruth with Dan. You know, listen, Phil and I have become friends, and you know, I've kind of floated the idea, and Phil is not a man who really likes to get the, you know, have the spotlight. He just doesn't like it. So I mean, Phil, I don't know what you're comfortable with, but Karm was curious. You know, it is a good point. You got the two grandchildren. As
So
difficult as that is.
I'm fortunate that I have 5 grandchildren.
Correct.
Excuse me. Shelly has 3 children that live in Toronto, and I am very, very close to those 3 grandchildren. There's a tremendous respect and love between us. My 2 grandchildren in Florida, you know, we had that when Danny was alive. And then when Danny passed away, we lost touch with them because I really don't want to go into all that because that's a separate issue. But we were held back. We were not allowed to see the kids for 6, almost 7 years. We had absolutely no communications with them. And since Danny, since that time, since we've had maybe 4 or 5 visits that last 45 minutes to an hour, and there's really very little you can accomplish in a 45 or hour visit with them, with other people around you. So I when I say I've lost 2 grandchildren, at this moment I feel I've lost them. They've been basically, I don't know what they know about the situation. I don't know what they're aware of. I don't know how they feel about us. I don't know anything really about them. So I can't comment. I don't know. Maybe when they'll be 18, they'll be able to contact us on their own. And maybe not. I'd love to love them as much as I love my 3 here in Toronto. I would have loved to teach them how to ride a bike. I would have loved to teach them to ski. I would have loved to teach them how to play golf, to tennis, whatever, like I did with these 3. But whatever it is, and that's about all I want to really say about that.
Yeah. By the way, for those who are joining late, we've got Phil Markel, the father of Dan Markel, on, who has given a soundbite or two to Dateline in 2020 and after some of the previous trials, but he hasn't really talked at length. And I'm really, I can't express my gratitude to Phil enough. But I said this earlier as well. I really kind of look at Phil as a father figure now, kind of guy that if I'm going through a tough time or I have a question about finances, since he was an accountant, I can call Phil. And I really do feel that way. So, you know, he agreed to come on, and this is not easy for Phil at all. So I appreciate him doing this, and he's probably going to go out and play golf to relieve the stress after this. But Phil, there was a question earlier. Was Dan more like Phil or more like Ruth? And Phil and Ruth are very different. And a special shout out to Ruth, who we all love. And Ruth has been on our show so many times. So hi, Ruth. I know you're going to be watching this. But what would you say? Was Dan more like you or more like Ruth without getting yourself in trouble, Phil?
His DNA is made up of both of our DNA. So I can tell you one part. The Markel family, and I'm going back, I never saw my grandparents. I never knew my grandparents. They got killed in the Second World War by the Nazis. But my father and mother were very, very warm people. And that has followed through to me and my sister. We like to give people a hug when it's appropriate. when we greet people. And Danny had that same part, that part of the DNA was part of Danny as well. I mean, if you met Danny, he rarely shook hands with you. He'd come over right away and give you a hug as a gesture of warmth. And that's basically what I think he got a lot from me, plus other things as well, of course, from both of us.
I think what he got from you is immeasurable. I know that. But my cat's name, Karm, this one's for you. My cat's name is
May I say
Karen.
something?
You sure can, Karm. Are you reading the question?
No, well, yeah, no. I just wanted to go back now. I'm fixated on the grandchildren because being an optimist, but also a realist, I think that the chapter on your grandchildren, Lincoln and Benjamin. I told you before, I'm bad with names. Forever bad with names. Anyway, Lincoln and Benjamin. That chapter, don't close it. Don't assume that this is the last that happened and this is the end. I think you once I heard the rabbi say this and it stuck with me.
By the way, the one thing, not to interrupt, Karm, but I just did the one thing I didn't warn Phil about is that he's going to get yelled at as well. And this is the part of the show, Phil. Thank you for coming on, where you too will be yelled at by my mother. Go ahead, Karm.
I have tremendous respect for your mother. I met her only once, and it was over dinner. And I love to listen to her. And I sometimes get angry at you how you mistreat her. But
I said to Phil when he told me that he gets angry at you, Joel, as a good mother, I defended you and I said I am pretty hard and pretty bad myself.
Well, anyway, keep yelling at Phil. Better him than me. Go ahead, Mom.
Okay. No, the thing is that I am an optimist but a realist. And once I heard a rabbi say something that's very, very obvious, but we don't think about. You cannot divorce your children or grandchildren. They are part of you. And something happened here historically, which we are not going to go into that, what has happened here. But it's not the end chapter. It's not the end of the story. Thank God they are developing. Both Lincoln and Ben are still in progress. They are very bright like their father, grandfather, and grandmother. And there is hope. There is something to look forward to when the relationship will be reestablished. Because I see it, I don't have the tea leaves, but I have my psychological tea leaves, and I think that will happen. And if I were in your place, Phil, that hope would give me additional strength. That what happened before was terrible, but what's coming with the grandchildren is hopeful.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm listening very carefully to what you're saying, and I do agree with you. If I've given the impression that my door is closed to them, then that's absolutely not the situation. I have a completely open door. I wish I can have the relationship with them that I have with my other 3 grandchildren. And if the time comes when there is that possibility, and I'm able and capable, I will open my arms and be there for them without question. The love of these 2 boys is special. It'll never disappear. And it's just very, very sad that we are being kept out of their lives and them out of our lives. And it's just awful. I mean, just recently, about 2 months ago, or a month and a half ago, we were supposed to, it was suggested that we have a visit with the boys, and Ruth, I didn't go, but Ruth did with my grandson, Shelly's son, Ari. But before that happened, we offered to Wendy, the mother, to come up to Toronto, take 3-4 days a week, whatever it is. Please come to Toronto, let the boys know where their father grew up, see the school he went to, see the house he lived in, see where he's buried, and learn about the family, the cousins, and everything. And we're prepared to pay the entire cost, flights, hotels, live with it, whatever it took. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. And so just why I tell you that is because the door is always open. Absolutely. I pray that we can have a relationship with these two boys. And I still hope that it'll happen. But
good.
I don't have the answer.
I'm glad that mentally you didn't kind of prepare yourself for something that will not happen. I'm glad that you are still realizing that it will happen. I see even people who are commenting are saying that it will happen.
It's going to happen. Rosemary Romero, who's in.
I called Iris Smith, who also repeated what I was thinking. So I like it.
And Rosemary Romero was at our book signing in Toronto, Mom, where Phil was. And Phil actually spoke and thanked all the content creators who are working on this story, which was really sweet of Phil to do. But Rosemary Romero was there. Phil, does Shelly ever do any public speaking on Dan? Would she be interested in coming onto SDS to talk about Dan? So I did ask if Shelly would come on. And here's, by the way, Phil, people are saying they love your glasses. And look at my glasses. Everything is cyclical. 50 years later, they're back in style. Or 45 years later, they're back in style, Phil.
Yes.
My big old glasses. But I just obviously want people, and a special shout out to Shelly. Shelly is brilliant in her own right, and also very, very, very sweet. And like you, Phil, doesn't really like to be in the public eye. Tell us a little bit about Shelly and Shelly and Dan's relationship.
Well, Shelly is very, very accomplished. She's both a lawyer and an MBA. She's done very, very well for herself in life. She's brought up, she and her husband, Ian, who is a tremendous son-in-law, brought up 3 wonderful, wonderful children, and they make us very proud. Shelly's on board. Shelly has been president of organizations, schools that the kids attended, all sorts of things. She's very accomplished, and she'll speak publicly, and when she does, she speaks exceptionally well. But she's a little reserved, somewhat like I am. Less so, I guess. I'm more reserved, but she's terrific. And she and Danny had a wonderful relationship. They rarely fought, like brothers and sisters normally do. You have to remember, Danny left home at the age of 17 when he went to Harvard to go to school. So, but we did a lot of things together. We skied together. We did everything, as a family. Like I said, we traveled a lot together. We had tremendous experiences. There you have them at a little older age. So, like I said, I'm very, very lucky that I had I have and had two wonderful children, and they've produced 5 grandchildren for us. And whatever else there is, it is. I have to accept life the way the cards are dealt to you. You have to accept the cards as they're dealt, and that's what we're trying to do.
Another kind of deep esoteric question, Phil, but I like these. These are kinds of things I would ask my own dad, who, as we all know, sadly passed. But there was a comment my mom mentioned it from Ira, and I can't seem to find it. And also another few comments. When a Jewish person dies, they say, "May his neshama have an aliyah," meaning may his soul go to heaven. Phil, I mean, I'm just curious what you think of that. Do you believe Dan is in a better place now, in a higher place?
I don't know what to believe. Like I said, I'm not very religious. I love tradition. I love celebrating all the Jewish holidays and whatever have you. When you lose a child, I sort of tended to lose maybe a little bit of my feelings towards God in heaven. I don't know. Like I told you, I every time I go to the synagogue, I say the prayer of Kaddish for Danny. It's something I do. What do I believe? I don't know. I really can't answer that question.
Here's a question. Yeah, here's the COE. Many of us only know Dan because of his murder, but you know Dan in a way none of us do, Phil. As you reflect on Dan's life, especially this week with the 10-year anniversary of his murder coming up, what do you remember about him? What do you miss most? You see him through a totally different lens. Great question, COE. Who, by the way, is yelling at me right now via text, but go ahead, Phil.
Well, I have a lot of, there's a lot of stories of Danny growing up. I mentioned to you that he left our house at the age of 17. So the time we spent with him after being away at school for undergrad, postgrad, were limited. And then he lived down in Florida. We saw him as much as we can. He always came to visit us and the family and participated in holidays, etc., etc. One of the things that I have a very, very fond memory of is I remember every time he'd come and visit, he had so many friends, he had limited time to spend with me, for example, or family, other than on the phone and what have you. So there was a time when he was away, he said, "Dad, we can go to have dinner together." I said, "Oh, how can we do that? I mean, you're in," he was either at that time, well, I guess he was in Florida or Washington. He said, "It's very easy." He says, "You have a tablet?" I said, "Yes." He says, "And I have a tablet." So we'll make an appointment a certain time. You sit down at the table and have your meal, and I'll sit down at my table and have a meal, and we'll have our tablets in front of each other. And it was like being in the same room at the same time. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So that's a memory that will last with me for a long, long time.
Now, Phil, I can't go through an interview with you without asking about ice hockey. You told me you used to skate, I think, in the streets of Montreal. Did you try to push Dan? I'm now trying to force my son to hit 1,000 forehands about now. Not really, but I'd like my son to become a pro tennis player. But did you ever have an inkling to push Dan into ice hockey?
I never had to push him. Ice hockey and skating is part of our DNA in Canada. You grow up there, especially there's a lot of parks, there's arenas. I mean, virtually, I don't know what percentage, but most kids learn to skate and play hockey. But Danny was a very, very determined individual. Everything that he had to do, he did with tremendous amount of determination to perfect as best he can. So the story about hockey, for example, at the beginning, he was not a very strong skater. He was good at handling the puck and passing and what have you, but his skating ability was not as good as he would have liked it. So we signed him up to take lessons from a Russian skating coach who was very, very tough. And he perfected the ability to skate. And every time his shift on the ice playing hockey, when he'd come off, his face was always red, 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 because he'd give it all for anything he did, he gave it all. I just have a very cute story to tell you that I don't think anybody has really heard, showing his determination. He was very young, and at a young age of maybe 12, 13, he had decided long ago he was going to go to Harvard University. And he knew that going to Harvard was, took a lot of skill, besides good marks, it's skills and activities and what have you. So he was quite young. He took a job this was in the summer, of course, at a bakery. And I don't know if usually when you go into a bakery, they give you your pastries and stuff in a box, and they take a piece of string and they tie the string around the box with a bow. And he took this job at this bakery, and his dexterity wasn't so fantastic at that time, and he couldn't tie the string around the box. And the owner of the bakery said to him, listen, if you can't do that, I'm afraid I'm going to have to look for another student to come in and work. He said, no. He brought home 3 empty boxes with a roll of string, and I sat there and practiced this with him for hours to show him how to do it, because he was not going to lose that job because he couldn't tie a bow on the string with a string. So that's just an example of the type of kid he was.
Yeah, I love that. And I remember Karm, you and we used to go to the Berkeley Bakery in Highland Park, New Jersey, and it would be that red and white little string that they would always wrap around the box. Phil from Sunix, my son was a student of Dan's shortly after Dan arrived at FSU. I'd like to think Dan's influence played a small part in the fine man, father, and attorney that he has now become. Best to you, Phil, and family. What's it like to hear from these people? We have Louis Baptiste on our show, who is also a student. Even the lawyer, Peter Tragos was a student. He has a big YouTube channel. What level of comfort or pride does it bring you knowing that the next generation of these attorneys were trained by Dan, look up to Dan, and still treasure what they were taught by him?
Well, I am very, very proud and obviously happy to hear from some of these stories from students, etc. Actually, now that this subject has come up, I remember very vividly FSU had a memorial for Dan after his passing. And I think I cried through the entire memorial, because besides professors who knew him or worked with him, there were quite a number of students that came and spoke about Danny and how a tough taskmaster he was, what they learned, how the first semester, or whatever it was, they disliked him because he was so tough and made their life difficult because he'd ask them questions and they didn't either have the answer or whatever. But they became very successful because of what he taught them and how he taught them. And I don't remember any of their names, but I think I have somewhere a disc with that memorial, which I should watch sometimes. That was very, very memorable. It brought a lot of tremendous good feelings in my heart that he was respected and he helped others to form their livelihoods and their lifestyles.
Yeah. By the way, Phil and I will talk periodically, and he'll hear the insanity in my house, my kids running around, and he always tells me enjoy it because it goes quickly. And coming from him, I take that very seriously. So even in the insanity of it all, the craze I just lectured my kids today to keep the house clean, and my kid came out with like a half a pound of Nutella, unbeknownst to her, attached to the bottom of the plate that she was about to put down on my new sofa, and at which point I screamed at her. But then I did remember Phil telling me, please enjoy it. So then I enjoyed that moment of that half pound of perilously dangling Nutella, which he was able to get back into the kitchen before it fell onto the new sofa.
Listen, the dry cleaner will be able to clean it very easily, but this is going to be a memory that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. So, you know what? It makes you angry at first when it happens, but wow.
Yeah.
You can't, the moments you lose, you'll never regain. So you got to just grab it all and live with it and enjoy it.
Yeah. And by the way, this is probably one of the most heartwarming shows we've ever done, and probably one of the most important. And it's just bringing aside, because you see firsthand that it's not just the victim, it's not just Dan, but it's this ripple effect, and how the families are literally just tortured by what happens when there's an act of violence. And you'll never see a family as full of grace and kindness as Phil and Ruth and Shelly. This is a rare showing here, but this is how they've handled it the whole way through. Someone asked earlier, Phil, and I have to be mindful of Phil's time. We'll go like about another 15 minutes or so. Karm's going to start to yell at me to wrap it up anyway. And I'm nervous because Karm has talked so little. But Phil, someone asked if Dan was there a point, if he was an academic prodigy, was there a point that you and Ruth turned to each other and said, our kid is no Joel Waldman. This kid's going to Harvard. He's obviously a step above everybody else. Was there a moment in time where you knew he was special in terms of his intelligence?
Listen, to us, to parents, your children are special no matter what. Not everybody can go to Harvard. Not everybody can go to university. You can still be successful in life doing other things. We never felt that. We knew both of them were quite bright. We loved them for who they were, and we tried to take advantage of whatever abilities they had to enhance and make it better. He loved to talk to adults. He liked to, even as a very young kid in kindergarten and stuff, there's a lot of stories that come to your mind as you talk about things. One example is when he was young, Trivial Pursuit was a game that a lot of people played, and it's a game of memory and a game of you have to remember, or you have to be able to answer a lot of questions. And I told you, Danny had a very strong ability to read something and retain didn't not a photograph, but retain. And he was his determination. So every time he had a free moment, he'd grab a handful of cards from Trivial Pursuit, and he'd just go through to read them as he went along. He'd go to the washroom and sit on the toilet. He'd take a handful of cards to read through, and the very few people could beat him at Trivial Pursuit. So, and to show you, there's one story before he actually learned to read very well. He was very young. He loved to read comics. He had a collection of comic books, God knows, hundreds of them. And one day I said to Ruth at the time, I said, it's time. He started to read very young, but all he reads are these comic books, Archie and all those other books that the kids had. I said, it's time maybe we should get him to read some books, even children's books. And thanks to Ruth, she said, you know what? He's reading. He loves to read. That'll come later. And that's what really happened. So he started very, very young. And, so did we really think they're super bright or anything? Everybody thinks their kids are smart. Everybody thinks their kids are loving and wonderful. We were no different than anybody else. We were just very fortunate that they turned out the way they did.
Phil, what is Dan waving around here? Everyone's asking. Do you happen to know what this is?
Actually, I do. That the part that he's not touching is where it sits on, and you threw rings onto the well, I can't show you.
It's upside down. It's upside down.
Correct. It's a game where you throw rings on, and that's what he was doing. That's what he was playing with.
Phil, there was another question, which, to be honest, it didn't occur to me, but it's very important, and you kind of touched on it very slightly. But Shelly's got her 3 kids. How has all of this impacted her children? Are you able to comment on that at all? I mean, it has to be hard on them as well.
Well, obviously, I mean, their relationship with Danny was very, very special. He was Uncle Bo to all of them. He was very loving to the kid. He loved kids.
Where did Uncle Bo come from? Where did that
come? I think I watched one of your podcasts with Ruth. I'm not sure. He once had a picture of a clown in his bedroom, and he was actually afraid of it. It was a period of time where he was afraid of it, and we used to make fun of him that Bozo the clown. So we nicknamed him Bozo, and he was Bozo to a lot of people. And some of his friends to this day, when we talk about it, they say, "Oh, Bo, this," and even my grandchildren, Shelly's kids, will refer to him as Uncle Bo. So, but his kids, they don't know them very well. They came, and like I said, before they divorced, he would bring them to Canada as many times as he can. They got to know them as young kids, but the last 10 years, they really don't know them very well.
Judaism, that became, a very big part of his life. You and Ruth are obviously culturally as Jewish as they come, involved in holidays, your Jewish identity. What do you think was driving Dan when his life was taken from him toward becoming a more religious and spiritual person?
Well, he both kids went to parochial school, to private schools that were they spend the longer part of the day because a lot of it had to do with Hebrew and culture and stuff with our religion. They Danny was always on the road to being religious. There's a cute story when he was just before his bar mitzvah. He had this thought of maybe one day he'd become a rabbi. And so before his bar mitzvah, he had an interview with the rabbi of our synagogue that, the rabbis always interview the kids before their bar mitzvahs. And so Dan asked him, he says, I'm thinking maybe of becoming a rabbi. Tell me, Rabbi, what are the perks of being a rabbi? And this rabbi was really very smart. And he loved Danny because, well, there's a lot of stories around that as well. But he sat there and he says, I'll tell you. He says, first of all, I have the best seat in the house. And then he says to him, I have a private parking spot that nobody can park in. So I never have trouble parking my car. And then he says, I love baseball. So there's a lot of congregants that have baseball tickets. I get to see a lot of baseball games. And he went on like this, So he, after that, he said, he came up with the idea, what, rather than being the rabbi, maybe I should be president of the synagogue. So he loved the culture of being Jewish. He liked all the traditions were very important to him. I don't know how. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you more than that.
Well, you mentioned he wanted to be president of the synagogue, not the rabbi, which I find interesting. But someone had a question earlier. I think it was Rosemary again from Toronto, wanting to know. Obviously, Dan was, becoming a very notable legal scholar. Where do you think Dan would have ended up? Now 10 years from now, someone wanted to know if he would have run for Senate one day. I mean, he had that the world was his oyster. Where do you think he would have wound up 10, 20, 30 years from now?
Well, I think about it, with all the troubling situations in Canada and the United States and with everything that's happening politically. There's one story when he was younger. He was in high school and he had a very, very close friend who's today a professor, I think in Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, they were very close. They both had very strong feelings about Israel. And together, the two of them said, one day we're going to write a treaty between Israel and the Arabs. That's at high school age. So today, I personally think, I don't know if he'd ever run in politics to be a senator or a congressman or anything like that. But I think he would have been involved in TV or something as an expert on various topics, etc. He'd probably be well known as, besides law. You see on TV a lot of these lawyers that are now commentators on CNN and MSNBC and Fox and what have you. He may have gone that route, but and I think he probably would have made a name for himself and hopefully do some good to society.
Yeah, well, he already had made a name for himself. I think the name would have just been magnified over time. Jared Ross is in the chat, Phil, and he, as you know, is helping run and coordinate justice for Dan Markel. We're going to have information in the show summary about where you can find out more about that. Right there is the COE putting that comment up. But forget the organization, but from a sort of a abstract theoretical point of view, to you, what is for you, what does justice for Dan Markel mean, Phil?
I have all kinds of thoughts about that, and with all due respect, I don't want to go there.
All right. No problem at all.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, not at all. So again, I mean, we're coming in. Karm, I want you to get a word in here. What's it been like for you, Karm, to listen? You're usually the talker, but I know you're listening I know when you're listening, Karm, and you're listening to everything. What have you gotten out of hearing Phil speak today?
That he's a very solid, honest, straight shooter type of a person who loved his son, and he cannot even convey it. He cannot get it through to the internet, all the love that he felt and still feels for him. And I feel the same. I feel like, I very rarely feel like crying.
Yes.
I am pretty depressed that way and kind of detached, but I feel like I want to cry too. Because what he went through, nobody should go through. And the sad thing is, like Phil said before we got together, that he has to go to a funeral. We all have to go of a friend, and we all have to go to funerals, and we have all very sad things happening to us, but some are sadder than the others.
That's very well put.
I just want to say something as we get close to the end. I know you can't. You see in the photo behind, in the view of me, there's lots of photos in the background, and I have photos of all my grandchildren. And I just want to say that, we love. As I said before, my door to my two grandchildren in Florida is always open. We love them dearly. We're doing one of the reasons I did this podcast with you is because I hope one day they'll see this and they'll hear me say how much we love them and miss them, and we wish they were part of our lives. It's important. It's very important, and we hope that one day justice will be done. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they're still turning, and we have tremendous respect for Mr. Campbell and his entire crew with Georgia and everybody else. I don't want to start naming names because I'll forget some. The police, the Tallahassee. When I think back the first 2 years when they didn't even have a clue as to what went on, the hard work that Detective Isom and his staff went through, everybody, and then especially you, Joel, and all the podcasters. This is a new medium, this podcasting business. And, we are so grateful to all of you because you've all played such an important role in keeping this story alive, in keeping this, in helping us with dealing with this situation and the memories. And even for the two boys in Florida, I hope one day you watch and learn and listen to all this, to know who your family was and is. All of you deserve such tremendous credit, and we are very, very much appreciative and in debt to you guys. And there's really not much more I can say other than that.
And we all appreciate it. And coming from you, it means a lot. Just two last questions. Number one, there are a lot of people in STS Nation who are watching right now and who will watch this, who are victims themselves. And and have lost loved ones or themselves have been victimized. What's your message to those people, Phil?
Learn to deal with it. It's very difficult. It's not something that is easy. You have to have memories. You have to think about it. You have to remember. But you have to deal with it and look forward to your life and try and enjoy every moment you can, because you don't know how long it's going to last. And talk to people, get help if you need it. It's very, very difficult. It's not easy losing someone that you spend many years together, or whether it's a child or a wife or a brother, a sister, whatever, even a friend. You know, you said, I have to go to a funeral today, but what's important is to visit a friend when they're ill and they're alive is more important than attending the funeral when they're not alive. So, try and be a good person, try and live life as best you can, and deal with the memories. I mean, we all have something to deal with, and it's hard. It's not easy. Some of us have help with it. I'm very fortunate to have somebody in my life that has been a big, big help to me, and that's about it.
Karm, the COE just wrote something. She's a great way of putting things, and she says that we all know how Dan died, but now we've learned how he lived. Karm, your final words about what you've taken away, and then a final question for Phil. But Karm, what did you learn about Dan today that you didn't know beforehand?
It's more than little facts. I got the texture of his life, the almost like I met him through your description, because in some ways I've been hearing about him for a while now, but the way you describe and go back to him playing with pots on the floor, and then going through his life in general, I think he was a good soul. He was a good soul, and I have the feeling I met him. I think a little he was like you, Joel.
I'm not
even positive.
Yes,
positive.
It is. I was trying to think of something quick there, and I just couldn't, and I don't want to say anything because in Hebrew there's an expression lehavdil, right, Mom? You can't to compare the two.
Of course. I said a little like you.
Dan's IQ is about 300 points higher.
But
than
I
me.
wasn't talking about IQ.
Yeah.
I was just saying something in the texture, something the way he related to his parents, something.
Yeah. No, I got you, Karm.
I don't have to apologize for what I said.
Not at all.
I just want to add. Yeah. I just want to add a very, very quick little thing. Ruth's mother was a mentor to me, and she was a very special individual. And she had a very, very favorite saying that she'd say to us, to Ruth, to me, to our kids, to the grandchildren. She said, "Nor sei a Mensch, only be a good person. Everything else in life is secondary." And I think that's so important. Those who are not Jewish and listening, the word mensch is just be a good person, but there's a tremendous deep meaning to that word. And just be really a good, kind, and good person. And that's very, very important to remember.
Final question, Phil, which is just Dan's legacy. When people think about Dan now, what do you want them to remember?
What we talked about, Joel. This is a redundant question.
Thank you, Karm. I'm just summing it up here. That's probably the best way to sum.
But it's true. It's true. He was a wonderful guy. He had his faults like all of us, which I told you at the beginning, I don't remember. But you know, he was a good individual. He cared about people. He was what my mother-in-law would say was a mensch. He introduced people. He to others. He had such a wide circle of friends. I don't want to say just, they were really friends, even if he met them only once. It was tremendous. He had that warmth. He had that ability to. He had faults, of course. He had faults. He was, you know, like all of us. But all of the good parts to him were very, very special, and all those who met him, I'm sure, remember him and have good thoughts, and that's what we have to live with.
And that's it. We're ending with life to live with. Those were the final words from Phil Markel. I cannot thank Phil enough. Thank Ruth enough for helping out behind the scenes. Shelly also for being there. I can't say enough amazing things about this family. I can tell you one thing. I do not think that I would be able to handle this the way that they have handled this entire situation. Keep in mind this week, please, we're going into the 10-year. It's been 10 years since this horrible murder took place. So just keep the Markels in your thoughts, and the boys, Phil, Ruth, Shelly, as I said. We're going to be doing a couple of special shows this week from Chicago. I'm dragging Karm to Chicago, my wife and the kids, for a couple of book signings this week. So we'll be doing it from there on the road. But Phil, we love you. We love the Markel family. Justice is continuing to come. Karm, do you have a final thought? You're leaning in, Karm. A final Karm thought.
The final Karm thought is that I thank you, Phil, and I thank your entire family who are always participating in these discussions and questions. And I have to make a correction, Joel. That you said this situation.
That's even a better way to end it. Go ahead, Karm.
I would say this is a tragedy, not a situation.
Absolutely. Sometimes when you're hosting a show, the words don't come right into mind, but you're absolutely correct. Is much more. It's a horrific, horrible. Call it what it is, a murder. Not even a tragedy, just an insane act of murder. So justice is coming. We made it through the entire show without mentioning that other family, which I'm thrilled about. This is all about Dan Markel. This week is all about Dan Markel. July 26th, by the way, is the Jewish anniversary of his death. So please.
And the 18th is the anniversary.
18th is the anniversary.
The American anniversary.
Correct. And
we are the 15th.
Yeah, and in typical Karm and Joel fashion, we can't say goodbye. Phil's like, get me the hell out of here. So on that note, love you, America. Love you, Canada. Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And, of course, Dan Markel. Justice for Dan Markel as we say goodbye. Phil, stick around.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Phil, thank you.
We love you.
Love you, Phil. Stand by for 1 second, Phil.